Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to Season 2 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast with me, Rory Lees-Oakes. And with me, sunburnt from his holidays around the world, is my partner in therapy, Mr. Ken Kelly. How are you, Ken?
Oh, I'm delighted to be back. And can you believe Season 2? We started this off hoping that people might find it of use and listen to it. And now we're going into Season 2 because there's been a demand. And I just had to have a bit of a smile when you talk about my international travels and my sunburn. I've been sat here in Warrington in the rain. So I've got a Warringtonian tan, which is kind of like an opaque whiteness, like almost like a china cup.
It's rust, Ken. That's what it is. It's not something, it's rust.
We are delighted to welcome you back as our listener, and we have got an incredible program lined up for you today. We're going to kick off talking about going back to study. Chances are you may be going into a new year, a new level, or maybe you're just starting out on this road and you've got the excitement of that. So Rory and I are going to be kicking that around for a little while. Then really interesting, Rory, in Theory with Rory today is going to be covering defense mechanisms. Whoa, there's a depth of knowledge and understanding in that. It goes deep. The rabbit hole on that one, I believe, goes very, very deep. So something to look forward to there. We've got something new for you. Season 1, we had skills with Ken. We've covered most of the basic skills. So we're moving on and we're looking at what we're going to be calling person-centered business. And person-centered business is having a muse about the ideas of how we can use our skills that we pick up and we learn from being counsellors and psychotherapists, and how we can turn that into something that we can earn a living from, maybe going into private practice, or even just techniques that we can use when interviewing, either for a placement or to go into an agency. And then we're going to be ending off with a heavy hitter, as they call it, the Ethical Framework here in the UK. So the Counselling and Psychotherapy Ethical Framework from the BACP was updated on the 1st of July 2016. We are recording this in August, so we look forward to speaking about what those changes have been and how they're going to influence you as a practicing psychotherapist or counsellor. So Rory, everyone's going back to college, back to university, starting their studies.
Yeah, exciting times, Ken. Just hearing you talk a little bit about going back to college makes me remember with fondness me starting back, and those feelings that can come up as either someone who's going to study afresh. I was a mature student like yourself, went back at 42 years old to study, and sometimes it's about just acknowledging those feelings. And you may be carrying stuff from your schooling past, and I have to say that education today is a complete, and I was involved in it for a decade, as were you, Ken. It's a completely different ball game to going back to our school days. It's more sophisticated. They know a lot more about education than ever before. And crucially, for people like me and you, Ken, they recognise dyslexia. So if you have dyslexia like ourselves, you can get help. Most good training organisations will help you with that. Colleges certainly have to, by law. And yeah, the journey ahead, it sounds fantastic. And it's one of the greatest journeys, I think, that anybody can take, to move in and to go into the world of counselling and psychotherapy.
Indeed it is. And the reason that we're touching on this topic right now is because both myself and Rory are based here in the United Kingdom. And it's the beginning of our new academic year in September. So there are learners going in afresh. There are learners maybe moving from one year to another. So that's why we're touching on this topic right now. And I'm mindful that the break, the holiday break, and we call it the summer break here, although I use the word summer loosely here because we haven't had anything that would indicate summer in the terms of sun. But that aside, you've got the break, you've got the holiday, you've got time to yourself. You're away from your peers, you're away from your learning institution, you're away from your studies, and you get into a different mindset, a different pace, a different rhythm within your life. And going back in is a process, and it's about considering where you're at, making that gear change, going from maybe the more lax summer holiday break into how am I going to prepare? What am I going to do differently this year? What did I learn from last year? And how am I going to take that forward into this new year of study? I'm also mindful that there's disappointment out there. I saw it on our Facebook page. If you haven't visited our Facebook page, I highly recommend you do so. We've got great conversations going there. Go to counsellingtutor.com, click on the Facebook page and come and join the conversation. But on that conversation, I recognize that there are those of us who maybe didn't get what we wanted at the end of the last academic year, where maybe we found we were not accepted on the next year's course within our learning institution. There was some disappointment there, and it's about how has that been managed? How are we moving forward on that disappointment? There's a lot going on.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And you're right in what you say. It's about moving from, kicking back during the summer and moving into a more structured way of life. You're turning up to your classes at a certain time. You've got assignment deadlines. So I'm going to share maybe a couple of tips. Ken may have a couple of tips just to get you into the swing of things. The first thing is don't panic. Most learning institutions have an orientation day when you go back. So you'll go back and you'll be just learning. If you're going back, you'll be just catching up and having a catch up with your tutors of what's been happening over the holidays. If you're in practice, they'll probably want to know how that's been during the summer break and how's your supervision been. If you're starting your courses, then almost certainly you'll get a tour of the facilities and a tour of the college. And the best thing about starting a new course, Ken, the best thing is you meet really neat people. I met you.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Yeah, you meet really neat people, and you go in and you don't know all these people, and then all of a sudden, at the end of maybe a year, you really understand people. Some you might not get on with, that's the human nature, but you meet really interesting people. And I've kept contacts through the years, from my training group. We still kind of bump into each other and have fond memories. And in fact, in September, I'm going to someone's 50th wedding anniversary. Oh, not 50th wedding anniversary. They'd be 100 years old if they were my 50th. A 50th birthday, excuse me. So, yeah, you get on with your peers. So about discipline, it's about setting your stall out. I always used to buy a diary, make sure that I knew exactly where I was at all times through the academic year so I could plan my time around it.
I love it. And based on this, we've decided that we've got a new slot segment. I don't know what you want to call it. It's not related to the podcast. It's going to be on our blog where we've actually done an outreach and we've asked certain students whether they wouldn't mind actually documenting their journeys. And they're going to be bringing you the good, the bad, and the ugly of the counselling training for them. They're going to be telling it as it is. So you're going to get honest students' journeys. So I encourage you to have a think about what going back means to you. And go and share it. Go and have a chat in the Facebook group. Let's get some conversations going and let's see what comes of that. And of course, if you want to see those student journeys, you're going to find them on counsellingtutor.com. That's counselling with 2 L's because we spell it the UK way here because we're based in the United Kingdom. But you're welcome to pop into the website there. You'll also notice the website's had a little bit of a makeover. It's wearing a smarter suit than it did if you were with us for the last season. But there you go. That's holidays. But moving on with the here and now, one of the things that you can most certainly guarantee you're going to be looking at when you get back is the theory of the chosen modality that you are studying. And of course, Theory with Rory is where we take that theory that may be complex at times and we put it into easy to understand words. And what is it that you're going to be sharing with us today, Rory?
Well, we're going to be visiting our Uncle Freud, who is the father, really, of modern talking therapies, arguably. And we're going to be looking at defense mechanisms, those subconscious processes that we put into place when maybe we find in life difficult or situation difficult. And I'm going to be discussing his view of ego on a very basic level for those people who may be doing level 2 or level 3 courses. And also I'm going to be talking about defense mechanisms. Freud identified 7 defense mechanisms. I'll be talking about that and just a little bit about his daughter Anna Freud, who then developed a whole theory around defense mechanisms.
Sounds exciting, sounds interesting. Let's go straight in to Theory with Rory.
Counselling Theory with Rory Lees-Oakes.
To understand defense mechanisms, it's helpful to know a little about the psychodynamic view of personality. Freud believed our psyche, which is not our physical brain, more our personality, the way we behave, is split into three. He called these parts the id, the ego, and the superego. Like an iceberg, the id is submerged, out of sight and in our subconscious. The ego and the superego, using the iceberg analogy, are mostly above the water and in our consciousness. The id is the primitive and instinctive part of our personality, rather like a wild child who is driven by emotions such as death, sex and libido. According to the theory, we are born with only the id part of our personality and go on to develop the ego and the superego at around 3 to 5 years of age. The id, however, remains a personality trait throughout our life. One of its traits is that it demands immediate attention. Freud stated that the ego is that part of the id which has been modified by the direct influence of the external world. It develops as a sort of negotiator between the id and the external world. However, as Freud himself observed, it's developed as a mechanism to postpone satisfaction and to help the individual fit into society's expectations of themselves. The ego concerns itself with more rational problem-solving states of mind and will go on to rethink solutions until the problem is solved, and in the theory, this is sometimes known as reality testing. Freud also wrote, the ego, like a man on horseback who has to hold in check the superior strength of the horse being the childlike id state. The superego's function is to control the id's impulses, especially those which society forbids, such as sex and aggression. It acts as a moral compass for the ego, striving for perfection rather than simple, realistic outcomes, and consists of two components, the conscience and the ideal self. It's driven by introjected values learned from our parents and society, and because perfection is the goal, falling short can lead us into feelings of shame or guilt. A good example of this conflict is the story behind my friend Kate, who, as a university student, decided after one too many Jaeger bombs to pour a full bottle of washing up liquid into a town fountain. Her id state thought this was highly amusing to watch. Clouds of foam engulfed the town square and blowing the breeze. Unfortunately, a passing police patrol stopped and arrested her. Down at the station, with reality kicking in and the Jaeger bombs wearing off, her superego started to wonder what fate would befall her. What would her parents say? Was she going to be kicked out of university? And she was getting a really bad headache, probably to do with a hangover as opposed to Freud's theories. To her surprise, the police officer, who gave her a mild ticking off, thought the whole thing was highly amusing. The id part of him enjoyed what had happened. However, his superego compelled his ego to do his duty and uphold the law. So why do we have defence mechanisms? Well, we use defence mechanisms to protect ourselves from feelings of anxiety or guilt which arise because we either feel threatened or because our id or superego becomes too demanding. In other words, the child in us or the super parent becomes too demanding and we have to develop a defence mechanism to protect ourselves. And Freud identified 7 defence mechanisms, but there are many more. So let's have a look at Freud's original 7. Repression. Pushing away a thought or a feeling, saying to yourself, let's forget about it. Many things can be an object of repression, such as painful memories or forbidden desires, although sometimes our true feelings can leak out in what is known as a Freudian slip, like the man who was introduced to a colleague who had got the big promotion he had applied for. His opening remark was, "Hello, I'm David, pleased to beat you." Denial. Refusing to accept that something exists or has happened. This can be a mechanism that is seen when someone refuses to accept the death of a loved one, or making excuses for continuing unhealthy behaviour such as smoking, with phrases such as, well, my granny smoked 40 a day and she lived until she was 102. Projection. Taking an aspect of yourself and putting it on someone else. For example, statements such as, other people make me feel uncomfortable, or I bet you're a Manchester United fan, are all examples of projection. Rationalisation. Creating an acceptable but incorrect explanation of a situation. For example, the man caught stealing computers from the warehouse he works at said at his trial, "It's not stealing. My company sells millions of computers for a big profit. They won't miss the 2 that I have taken," an opinion which the judge presiding over his trial for theft clearly disagreed with. Intellectualization, thinking about something logically without any attached emotion. For example, "Counsellor, well, Jane, your husband has left you and you have been made redundant. How does that feel?" Jane responded, "I know I have a lot more time on my hands. I can tend the garden and catch up with some odd jobs around the house. As for my job, well, I didn't like it very much." Reaction formation, doing the opposite of what you'd really like to do. Being over nice to someone you dislike is a good example of this. The best example is the person who mutters through gritted teeth, no, I'm not angry." Well, they clearly are. Regression, acting in a way a child might if they did not get their own way. Foot stamping or speaking in a whiny voice, storming off are good examples of this. If you find yourself arguing with your partner in a whiny, "it's not fair" voice, then almost certainly you're displaying regression. Freud's daughter Anna, a well-respected therapist in her own right, went on to develop a more detailed and wider view of defence mechanisms, as have other researchers in the field. However, it is Freud himself who is credited with developing the concept of what is termed ego defence mechanisms.
Really interesting, that, Rory. And I love the work of Freud. And when you went in, you said arguably the father of talking therapies. And it's just an interesting story of Freud. But one of the things that comes from him that there's no doubt about it is how much stuff actually goes on subconsciously, the way that we're acting and the way that we are being. And I guess he put the name to it without us really knowing about it. Really interesting stuff.
It is. And the more I look into it, the more fascinating it becomes. Moving on from the subconscious to the conscious, Ken. Do you see what I did there?
I like that.
And consciously trying to build a mindset of when we're looking for placements, when we're qualified and we may be looking for work, of having that mindset that gives us the success we richly deserve. People work really hard in their training. And as I always used to say to my students, you deserve the success that you've earned. And to do that, you need to think and maybe present yourself in a certain way. And Ken is going to tell us about person-centered business.
Yeah, and it's a new slot, person-centered business, and I'd like your feedback of whether you find it useful or not. So the idea is that as we go through our counselling studies, very little of the time is dedicated to how we can use our skills once we graduate, how we can sell our skills into an agency, how we can start our own private practice. So I thought I'd put a little bit of a segment there. You'll hear by listening to the segment what my background is and why I feel compelled, I guess it's a really strong word, but it is how I feel to bring you this little segment. And today we're looking at the mindset that we have as therapists, of psychotherapists, and very often that mindset can be that we don't want to sell what we have work very hard to achieve, because we're in a helping profession. But I put it to that doctors are in a helping profession, and boy, do they enjoy getting paid. Nurses are in a helping profession. There's many people in helping professions that get paid a good wage, a good salary, or run good businesses around that. And hopefully person-centered business will go some way into examining that.
Person-centered business with Kenneth Kelly.
Welcome to Person-Centered Business. I want to take a little bit of time during season 2 from each and every podcast to consider, to muse upon the ideas of what we can do with our skills once we have them. So we go and we study and we dedicate our time, our energy and our money into becoming counsellors, psychotherapists. What is it that we do with those skills? And is there a way that we can benefit from those skills? And today I wanted to focus on the mindset of accepting or making money from this pureness that we practice as counselors, as psychotherapists. So we know that there are many opportunities out there to make money. You can go into private practice, you can go and work in a company where you are paid a salary, but there tends to be, amongst counselors, amongst psychotherapists, a wanting to give back. And this is reinforced during our training, in the UK, you're going to do a minimum of 100 hours of placement work. And that is traditionally unpaid work where you will be out there sharing your time, being with clients, and giving that time free of charge. Usually when we go into those placements, we're working in agencies that may be serving a sector of the society that doesn't have a lot of money. Not always, but there are times when we'll find ourselves in those kind of agencies. And it kind of reinforces this idea that we should be giving this away for free. But here's the reality on that. In the same way as when we go through our personal development to become a counselor, we examine our limiting beliefs, we examine our frame of reference, we examine our self-concept. The same is true for the business side of what we plan to do as counselors, as psychotherapists. We need to really examine that. Yes, we're here to make a difference. I don't think anybody listening to this would be listening if they weren't here to really make that difference. But we do have the right to get paid for the skills that we have, for the training that we have done, and for sharing what we have. Now, it may well be that you decide, no, I actually just want to do this charitably, and that's fine. There are thousands of people out there. You just walk into a charity shop. The people behind the counter are giving their time free of charge. They choose to work for charity, and that is okay. But similarly, if you walk into a department store, there are people there also selling stuff, and they actually get paid for it. And it's about where you choose to place yourself in this. So, in person-centered business, I hope to be sharing some ideas, some strategies, some marketing ideas that you can use, that you can think about to develop and plan your very own private practice, or ways that you can make money out of the skills that you develop. And I see this as an underserved area. When we study counseling, psychotherapy, very little, if any, time is given to how we can use these skills, how we can sell these skills. So the first question is this for you? Well, it depends, Where are you in your journey? If you're just starting on a level 2, just taking those first steps into learning about counseling, maybe getting paid for those skills feels like far away. But if you've taken the commitment to do a level 3, to do a year's worth of study, then that's quite a commitment, a year of your life. So it may be worth now starting to consider what you might like to do. Is there a specialism ahead for you? Do you want to go into private practice? What are your routes? What are the possibilities? Maybe you're in level 4. Well, in level 4, you're going to need to be able to sell. That's for sure, because you're going to go and you're going to need to get a placement. And part of the deal is sitting and having an interview. And in that interview, you're going to be selling yourself. So today, it's just the introduction. I'll just give you a little bit of background of why I feel this is important and why I bring this. Number one, when I was a student, Rory did a module on preparing to go into practice, preparing the business side of what we do as counselors and psychotherapists. And I'm so grateful to have had that. I went on to go into private practice, and I now run what I consider to be a successful private practice for myself. The other reason this really interests me is because of my other interests in life. I am a conversion marketer. That's what it's called, and that may not make a lot of sense, but it basically means I do digital online marketing. I help businesses to get measurable, repeatable results online in their marketing in terms of their website and converting that into customers at the end of the day. So it's a skill set that I actually hold. So business is important to me. And I wanted to share some of those very techniques that I share with my corporate clients with you on how you can go on and build a healthy, income-producing practice from being a counselor or a psychotherapist. So that's the mindset side of things. And I guess if any message I leave you with today, it is for you to challenge your thinking. How do you feel about making money from what you do? Does it sit comfortably with you? Or is there a dis at ease feeling when you think about that? I don't think there's a word as dis at ease, but there you go. I've just thrown that in. Do you feel ill at ease, I guess is better when you think about that. And if you do, why? Challenge that self-concept that you have. Are you not worthy of charging for the skills that you've worked so hard to get? All those assignments, all of those hours of college work? Have a think about that. There are a number of companies, institutions around the world that specialize in helping counselors and psychotherapists better their business to kind of ease that barrier going into private practice. And in speaking with some of them, they come back and they say the same thing again and again. And the thing that they say most often is the biggest barrier they face is the mindset of the counselor of not feeling worthy, of not seeing it as a business. So I'm going to leave you with this here today. Thousands of people graduate as counselors and as psychotherapists each and every year. And I'm just speaking about here in the UK. So often the feedback comes back that there's no work out there, that the market is saturated, that there's no paid work. Well, here's the thing. It is your responsibility. If you want it, you can plan and you can implement so that you have a business, your very own business that you can step into. And that may not be just as you graduate. You might want to get out there and get some experience under your belt, but start planning it now. Start planning what your goals are. If you've got the map in front of you, then you know where you're going and you can implement the steps that you need to take to be able to get you there. Person-centered business is about looking at the business side of what we do in a person-centered way.
Absolutely fabulous, Ken. So informative. And, Carl Rogers didn't work for nothing. I've read a lot of Rogers. He was a very wealthy man by the time he passed on in the 80s. He was he did okay. And, when I started teaching counsellors, after about 3 or 4 years, certainly at the practice level where people were graduating and moving on to develop their own practices, I used to teach Sun Tzu's Art of War as a way of getting into a mindset. So I'm not saying everybody should go around with shields and spears and demand a job, but there's a certain kind of elegance into that guy's thinking where he set certain structures in place to allow clear thinking of how someone approaches the task of getting those skills they worked so hard for and making a career out of it. And that's exactly what you were talking about, Ken.
100%. So that's person-centered business. We'd really appreciate your feedback. Does this have a place in the Counselling Tutor Podcast? Because this is for you, and we put this together for you. So if you think that bringing the business side of things will be useful, we will keep it. If you don't, then we'll change it and we'll bring you something that you do feel is more of a fit for you. So let us know, and the best way to let us know is through that Facebook page. And of course, it's really easy to find. You just go to Facebook and put in Counselling Tutor, and we're going to come up right at the top. Or go to our website, counsellingtutor.com, click on the Facebook tab and come and join us there. But moving on, and it's a really hot topic in the UK right at the moment. We've just had the introduction, 1st of July 2016, of the new ethical framework released by the BACP. What are your thoughts, Rory? There's a couple of changes there, and I guess we're going to discuss this briefly, and we will have a more in-depth chat about this. In fact, a lecture, which if you're a member of the Counselling Study Resources, that means you get our bi-weekly lectures. It's live lectures that I held. We're going to be doing an in-depth look at the new ethical framework and looking at how you compare the ethical framework with a different ethical framework from a different organisation, because that's assignment related. But for now, just touching on kind of some of the main points, Rory.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting. When I started in my training, which was 14 years ago, the BACP had just been called the BACP. It was the BAC at that time. And it was, I don't want to be kind of too rude to the BACP, but it was a little bit like a cottage industry counselling. And I was taught, that counselling was an emerging profession. It was a profession that was starting to find a voice in the world of health. And let me tell you, it's got a big voice now. And this ethical framework really underpins how serious mental health and how counselling and psychotherapy is taken, not just by ourselves as practitioners, but by our colleagues across different disciplines of healthcare. So the ethical framework, there's a couple of things that the ethical framework's changed this new one. And the first is, if a member of the general public were to read it, they'd know exactly what was expected of a therapist. Before, you really had to be a therapist to understand it. Now it's really, really clear. And they put in things like it's forbidden to have sexual relationship with a client. Now, most therapists would have thought that was a given, I would have thought.
Yeah.
But this is absolutely clear, and it means that there's no ambiguity now. There's no riddle room for argument that inappropriate relationships are not allowed at all.
And I think just jumping in on that, Rory, I think what's really important here is you're 100% correct in that the document has been written in, I guess, more plainly. The language is not highfalutin, and it can be read by a member of the public, as indeed it is intended to be read by a member of the public. You go to the BACP website, it's one of the first things you're going to come across. As counsellors and psychotherapists, at least in the UK, if you are a member of the BACP, you should be offering the framework to your clients to look over if they wish to. It's part of the deal. It's part of the contracting we will do there. And yes, of course, it's a given. If we're a counselling student, a psychotherapy student, of course we know that we don't engage in sexual, inappropriate, or any sexual relationship with anybody that we're counselling. But do our clients know that? And we know from transference and from the erotic transference that a client can maybe be attracted to us because they're experiencing conditions they may have never felt in any other part of their life or perceived in any other part of their life. How do they know that a sexual relationship is not appropriate? Well, it's now written in plain English and they can read that. So I think that's a really important point there, Rory.
It is, which brings me to the next point that's in the framework, which is called a duty of candour. You find in a lot of other professions, a duty of candour is written into their policies and procedures or their code of ethics. And as Ken and myself will know as former trainers, a duty of candour is where you take someone onto one side and you say, OK, I think that you may be in danger of getting yourself into a whole heap of trouble by carrying on down this path. And I have to say, Ken, that in the past years gone by, I've been surprised at how quiet some therapists' voices have been when I've been in, say, training groups, maybe if I've gone to CPD courses, I've done a lot of CPD, where someone has said something which is clearly wrong. And now you have a duty as a therapist to say, I'm sorry, that isn't right.
Yeah, I like that. That's a really, really good point. And I know, Rory, that was something that we certainly instilled in our learners before it was in the BACP Ethical Framework, is speak out. And I think you mentioned exercise your courage muscle.
Yes. Well, we used to teach Maya Angelou, wonderful Maya Angelou, who, look her up on the internet, I won't tell you, but look Maya Angelou up. And she famously said, without courage, you cannot practice any other virtue with consistency. And sometimes it does take a lot of courage to say to a colleague, you know, what I'm seeing here isn't good for you, isn't good for your client, and I'm going to have to do something about it. But we have to do that because we owe it to our clients and we owe it to the profession. And now it's written in the ethical framework, Ken.
Yes. And we're signing up for that. The ethical framework, you're saying yes, and you actually have to sign it. I've gone through and signed mine, and that's part of the deal to practice. And it's not just with colleagues; it's with agencies as well. It's difficult in an agency. If you're working in an agency and that is your income, it's difficult to stand up and say no, that's not right. We're ethically obliged to do so now. I think that's a big round of applause for the old BACP popping that in the ethical framework.
I think it does, again, align up with other healthcare professionals. And the final one that I want to kind of think about is that student therapists, or those in training, have a duty now to inform their clients that they're in training. And this is something that's come up again and again. In my past as a trainer, I've had agencies says, well, you don't have to tell the client that you're a trainee. And the subtext of that is, well, they might not want to work with the trainee and they might not come back. Well, I'm afraid ain't no choice now. You have to tell them. The framework says that in normal circumstances, you have to tell them. And in my experience of being honest and saying, you know, I'm in my final couple of years of training, which if you're doing a diploma, you are, people are okay about it. But no longer can we have this, well, don't tell them in case they'll go mentality. You know, so if you're a student listening to this, and you probably are, and your agency says don't tell them, just waft the ethical framework under the nose.
Yeah.
Waft it under the nose. And I'd like to pick up finally, Ken, on the point you made about it being a British ethical framework. Well, actually, I know we've got our friends in New Zealand and Australia, our audience over there, our listener in Perth, our listener in Brisbane, our listener in New Zealand. And actually, you'll find, and I'll touch on this in my lecture that I'm going to be delivering to this CSR study group, that they're pretty universal elements for therapists. And I know that the Australian awarding bodies take on a lot of the BACP, as the Americans do, as our friends in America do. So what the BACP does is followed a lot by other countries and other overseeing bodies.
Very much so. And the ethical framework is more encompassing now. It is more aligned, I guess, to the ethical frameworks that would govern nursing and doctors. And so it's more holistic. It's well written. There's so much more there. There's stuff on note-taking, which kind of hit the UK with a bit of a bang, where there were people that chose not to keep notes. Now you have to keep notes. It's written in the BACP Ethical Framework. It's got stuff about supervision. It's got stuff about being a tutor. In the ethical framework. So it really is more encompassing, and I'm happy to see it. We're all excited about that. And of course, Rory, you're going to be doing a full lecture on that, going in depth. And the reason you're doing that is because part of studying is you got to write about the ethical framework time and time again. And it's to show that you have an understanding so that you can kind of mirror that within your practice. And different awarding bodies ask different questions. But at the end of the day, all they're saying is, do you understand this ethical framework thing? That's what it boils down to. And Rory's going to be breaking down the new ethical framework in the CSR, the Counselling Study Resource live lectures. That one is coming up on the 4th of September. If you are in the CSR, we will see you there. If you're not in the CSR, you got to go and have a look at this. Where can you find out more? You just go to counsellingtutor.com. And you can't miss it. It's right there on the homepage. Counselling Study Resource is the most comprehensive resource for counsellors and psychotherapists that are studying. There is an absolute wealth of information over there. So go and have a look, have a little bit of a wade through the information there and see if it's a fit for you. And if it is, come and join us and hundreds of other learners from around the world in the Counselling Study Resource Group. But that kind of brings us to the end of our time for today, Rory.
It does. We're busy getting ready for all the other fantastic things that we're going to be telling you about in Counselling Tutor. And you know what, Ken? I subconsciously could see a teapot in my mouth.
There's a cup of tea in them there hills. As we say here in the UK, it's great to be back. We kind of stop where we started, and when we started, we recognised that certainly in the UK, many people going back into study now or starting study for the first time, that there's a preparation and a journey in there. Well, Rory and I have had that journey before making this recording, because we're making it slightly before everyone goes back so that we can bring it out timeously. And it's now time for you, I guess, to have a contemplate about what's your year ahead going to look like, your academic year. How are you going to manage that? And what can that be? It's a wonderful, wonderful journey we find ourselves on.
It's an incredible journey and one that will change your life forever.
We're glad to have that journey with you, at least part of it, and to be in your ears through the Counselling Tutor podcast. Join us on counsellingtutor.com. We've got some great blogs there, jam-packed full of information. You can get into the Counselling Study Resource from counsellingtutor.com. And, of course, make sure you join us on the Facebook page. Let's get the conversations going there. It's exciting times, guys.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.